this panel discussion under the title Catalyzing DRR Within and Across Sectors for Transformative Governance, and which is being kindly hosted by this SADC Pavilion. So we'll do our best for all of you to hear us. My name is Victoria Hugelshofer, and I have the pleasure of being the moderator today. I'm a senior policy officer with the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, or BMZ. And in the field of disaster risk reduction, we have worked with the SADC very closely. Closer, yeah? Amongst others, through the Global Initiative for Disaster Risk Management, as well as the Resilience Initiative Africa. And so I'm very happy to be having this discussion with the distinguished panelists today. I will just say a few words before we start into the questions. Over the past decades, disaster risks have become increasingly severe and exacerbated by the effects of climate change, resulting in more and increasing and frequent extreme events. Not least have the ongoing effects or impacts of El Niño in the SADC showcased the systemic nature of risks across sectors, accounting for loss of land and livestock, as well as the disruption of productive sectors because of insufficient water supply for hydrogen power generation. With often very wide-ranging effects of disasters, we have also seen an increasing awareness for the need to integrate DRR measures across different sectors and fields. Yet, as has also been, for example, highlighted by the midterm review of the Sendai framework, implementation of risk-informed development is still barely sufficient. Risks are still not adequately addressed and taken into account in the planning and programming of development measures. That is why, for example, efforts like the SADC's mainstreaming DRR guidelines have been so crucial, as they recognize the relevance of critically looking at each program, activity and project that is being planned when it comes to risk. So, looking at all that has been achieved already, and especially the long way we still have to go, I am honored to be discussing today with the distinguished panelists representing a range of sectors what it means to integrate disaster risk reduction into development planning. Yet before I introduce the esteemed colleagues to you, it is my pleasure to hand over to our keynote speaker, Dr. Pius Nube, Program Coordinator at the SADC DRR Unit. Pius, maybe I would like to invite you to kick us off and to share your insights on the work of the DRR Unit and the opportunities and challenges associated with risk-informed development. Thank you.
We also look at the issue of sectors as a microcosm of the macrocosm of sustainable development, of risk-informed development, and making sure that if then we are able to bring those aspects into specific sectors that I've mentioned, we'll be able to achieve. I think one of the questions, Madam Moderator, you have posed is what are the challenges within the region for integrating risk reduction within sectors? And I can already say and talk about issues of capacity. I think we have that, it's lacking. And basic awareness. People, they may not be aware in terms of what are the elements that should go into sectors to make sure that we focus on risk-informed development or integrating disaster risk reduction within those sectors. And also, of course, the obvious thing of resources, financial resources and capacity, we also have to look at that we are able to bolster that. And the whole framework, I think the regional disaster risk framework and the resilience frameworks that we have really do not speak to this more specifically. We also need to look at how we institutionalize the issue of risk reduction within our legislative framework and institutional framework. Because, and the localization, the development plans that our member states and governments are developing, we have to be sure that this deliberately integrate risk reduction and risk-informed development in the main. And also the issue of resilient infrastructure. How do we use the money in a different way to make sure that we are able to put our dollar and cents where it matters in terms of risk-informed and resilient infrastructure within specific context. So this is an area which is still very gray, at times uncharted waters, because we see when we have disasters, we have often seen how we also lose infrastructure and in the process lose lives. So it means that we need deliberate policies, strategies that really speak into this, even in terms of, I mean, we need to move away from the silo approach. You know, we see that the integration in terms of integrated planning that focus on risk reduction and risk integration, it is not really happening within member states and even at regional level. And we need a regional framework that speak into these things.
I represent the Secretariat, and under the Secretariat we have a Climate Service Center, which is hosted with the Botswana Met Service in Gaborone. So that's sort of a independent center. In terms of when we are talking about climate data and climate services, actually it's critical in supporting DRR and promoting climate risk development across the key economic sectors that you mentioned for water, energy, agriculture, and so on. In fact, the priority 4 of the Sendai framework explicitly mentioned climate services as in enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. So data is important all through the DRR cycle. Climate services actually significantly and directly contributes to enhancing safety and well-being of the society. And Dr. Pius just mentioned, even when the private sector, when they are adding a cost, a benefit to it. So in terms of loss and damage, the information, climate data and climate services is important, and in particular to sustainable development and economic growth. It further contributes to improving access of, for example, clean drinking water, enhancing food production, and also when we are talking of exploitation of renewable energy, green energy. It has been critical in mitigating and adapting to climate change. In the water sector, I would like to take, for example, an example of the provision of the long-range forecast, the long-time series of climate data. These data can support in building hydrological model, and this would in turn enable us in better understanding the impact of climate variability on the water resources availability. Another example is a seasonal forecast, which actually directly help decision makers in water management, water resource management, when it comes to allocation, prioritization in the various water demand sectors, including urban water supply, irrigation system, flood storage capacity, and hydropower generation. Now, the Climate Service Center, it is already supporting these priority sector. We are already tailoring various sector-specific products for water, agriculture, and energy sector. For example, for agriculture, product like the onset date of rainfall, the various drought indicators, and so on. I don't want to go to the details, but if you Google our website, the SADC Secretariat, it has its own website, but the SADC Climate Service Center, we have a standalone website where you can find all our product and services. So generally the center, we are a regional center, and we provide climate services for all the 16 SADC member states, and our services is aiming to create resilience in the region. And now coming to the question about how SADC CSC is facilitating cooperation among the various sectors. Indeed, we already, I can proudly say, we are doing a good job. We have the EU-funded CLIMSA program, which started like 4 years back. And through this funding, we've done quite a lot when it comes to improving collaboration among sectors. We have improved the stakeholders' engagement among the WEF nexus, including DRR as a cross-cutting sector, through the establishment of the user interface platform for these key sectors, and SOCOF, which is the Southern Africa Regional Climate Outlook Forum. So during that forum, this forum is a main stakeholders engagement. It is organized biannually, and it brings together all these main stakeholders from these key priority sectors. And in addition to that, recently we have developed a mainstreaming guidelines. This mainstreaming guideline is for non-climate specialists, actually, how climate services can be mainstreamed into the various strategic planning and policies. We have also provided a number of capacity building, not only to MNHSs, but also to policymakers in climate sensitive sectors at a regional level. We are currently developing, you mentioned, Dr. Pius, about the framework that is needed. So currently we are developing a regional framework for water and climate services for the SADC region. This framework, actually, it is intended as an institutional mechanism to coordinate, facilitate, and strengthen coordination among regional institutions in the water sector and the climate sector. So it will improve co-production, tailoring, delivery, and use of science-based water and climate prediction and services. I think I'll submit now, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as introduced by Moses Ntlamele, the program officer in the energy subsector of SADC. I just want to start with the brief background of energy in the region, especially when it comes to power subsector. When you take the generation mix, we are sitting in a situation whereby we are still dominated by thermal coal-fired power plants, followed by hydropower, which is occupying like 24%. But taking this international level, you take countries such as Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi, Lesotho, Eswatini, they are still their generation capacity is dominated by hydro, which is very vulnerable to disasters such as the severe drought, El Nino, and so on and so forth. The other point that I want to mention is the fact that energy infrastructure itself, for its development, is very capital intensive. And as a result, it takes time to prepare, to conceptualize a project, to appraise the project until it reaches the financial closure. It takes time. There's a lot of consultation that has to go into that process. And hence we have the situation that we have in the region in terms of the deficit. And this also led to delays in terms of energy infrastructure development in the region. But now coming to your question as to what the past disaster that we experienced in the region, such as the El Nino, we are all aware that around 2015-16 in the region we also suffered the El Nino. And during that time, we also have some member states that we suffered severely, those who depend entirely on predominantly from hydropower. As a result, there was a huge deficit that we suffered. In addition to deficit due to lack of generation capacity, but there's also increasing demand, which also is another aggravating or escalating the situation from the way it is now. Then looking forward, what SADC is doing or what SADC member states are doing, we have been advocating for diversification of generation in terms of energy, such that we don't rely on one form of energy as a source of supply. And I can cite that since 2014 to 2024 now, if you take the major generation primary source of energy, they increased from 4. We used to have coal, we used to have hydro, we used to have some nuclear in the region, and very minimal renewables. But as we speak today, we have about 10 energy primary sources of energy. We have from different sources of energy. We have nuclear, we have gas, natural gas. Take countries such as URT, United Republic of Tanzania. Their generation capacity is dominated by gas as we speak today. You take to Mozambique, they are also generating from gas. These are the diversification of energy, which you have been advocating for. Apart from the sad story, which Dr. also mentioned here yesterday during the internal session, where we are suffering for the countries that depend on Zambezi River, such as Zambia, there are huge challenges. Then the issue that I mentioned also, the issue of capital intensiveness of the generation or energy projects. SADC is developing or in the process of operationalizing what is called the regional transmission infrastructure financing facility. This is meant to support the development of projects so that you can accelerate them to reach bankability and financial closure. And also to ensure that we look into the issue of collaboration or cooperation among the member states. We have the instruments. One of them, which is Apex, is the SADC Protocol on Energy. It has just been revised. In the revision, we are trying to, as much as possible, to incorporate all issues such as PESTEL, the energy trilemma. Energy trilemma means that when we are safeguarding the energy supply, but also take into consideration the social impacts, take into consideration the issue of the environmental impact. That's how the protocol now is being structured so that it can accommodate all these issues. Of course, the political issues and so on and so forth are very critical. Then, one thing that I want to also defend, to inform the forum or the market is the fact that we as SADC were also developing the just energy transition framework, which will guide how member states can transit from fossil-based energy supply to more cleaner energy. Once this framework is being approved by the structures of SADC, it will be a document that will be used for reference and for alignment and domestication at national level. What I also want to maybe to conclude, moving forward now to how best we can integrate the DRR in our programs. As I mentioned that traditionally, when we develop the project, there's what you call the Asia studies that we normally undertake. That is environmental, social impact assessment studies. We have been proposing and we are still trying to engage our colleagues even from DRR. Can't we also include the issue of the disaster resilience as one of the prerequisites for the projects for it to get its approval stage or for it to be implemented? Just like the issue studies that are undertaken, that we know that these studies have to be there and have to be validated and be approved by the authorities. Let's have that also the study that or the components to how the infrastructure is going to be disaster resilient, like we saw in the case of the cyclones that we experienced in the region, the drought that we have in the region, so that we can also incorporate this. I think with these few remarks and thank you very much, moderator. I'll wait for further questions.
I turn to you, Dr. Dumisani Nzebele, as you will be talking about the water, energy, food ecosystem nexus approach, which is, as it sounds like, also already an integrated approach. So maybe if you could tell us a bit more how water governance within this nexus approach can be strengthened to ensure that risks are addressed systematically and not in isolation, meaning that they promote a multi-stakeholder cooperation.
Thank you very much, moderator. Greetings to all. The Nexus WEFE, Water, Energy, Food and Ecosystem Nexus. It's an integrator concept which allows us then to pool resources, complementarity among the sectors, fighting a common problem. Working from the water space, of course, the rationale is that of water security in light of disasters, be it drought, floods, and the issue of DRR, disaster risk reduction itself. Talking on the governance, there could be two facets to it: the governance proper and the strategies that are linked to that. The governance deals with the institutions and policies. In SADC, we are pushing for the institutionalization of the nexus concept so that it is deliberate, can be monitored, and indeed enforced. We have developed a SADC WEF Nexus framework, which allows us to pull resources, energy, water, food security. We are trying now to graduate ourselves to bring the ecosystem approach sector on board as well. Working with the ecosystem approach in the river basin, transboundary river basin management, we are now strengthening partnership between river basin organizations and the transfrontier conservation parks so that we can look at the water from source to sea and in a catchment sense in its totality. So that's what we're doing. But we also have a regional multi-stakeholder forum whereby we bring all these sectors together to engage in those issues. So even the issues of disaster risk reduction, that is a platform that is available. Like I've said, the idea is also to open it up to also take on board environmental sector dealing with the ecosystem dimension. Come to strategies and approaches. Talk risk-informed programming and planning. Sureka has touched that we have got the SACO forum, the seasonal outlook forum for SADC, which brings an opportunity of bringing us together, all these sectors, to hear the forecast together, analyze the forecast together, and then each hearing each other what are response strategies. So that is the approach we are also taking. Nature-based solutions, we're working in the river basin with the river basin organization transboundary to indeed deal with the entire system of systems in relation to wetland resources, land resources, forest resources, and other aquatic related resources, so that indeed we deal with the totality of it. And also flood emergency preparedness plans are other strategies we push, and likewise drought preparedness plans, strategies we push. They are presently at local levels, the big dams, but we'll push them to basin-wide in terms of their implementation. Lastly, dam synchronization and joint decisions in dam operations. There's a competition between objectives of flood regulation through dam infrastructure and the irrigation sector. Our dams regional-wise now we are about 75%. About 30% of those are above 90%. The irrigation sector would like to keep them full, but the disaster risk expert would be saying, let us preempt them so that there's a buffer storage to cushion in terms of flooding. So that's a difficult conversation, is what we are working on. And indeed, irrigation and hydropower are also competing. It's another negotiation space we are pushing. Lastly, in the rationing, once the drought is predicted to come, rationing measures have got to be executed. But tendency is that the water guys just plan ration irrigation, ration industrial this way. But gradually we're introducing the issue of joint decision making about how the rationing will happen. Presently, hydropower, irrigation, industrial are involved. But I imagine we need to now deal with bring on board also in the environmental sector so that the e-flows are also attended to. I thank you, moderator. Thank you.
Our next panelist, Dr. George Athieu, who will be speaking to early warning systems and especially what innovations in ICT can ensure that timely dissemination of critical information to vulnerable communities and sectors occurs, and even in times when no hazard is posing a concrete threat, and preparedness is the better option. So maybe I will pass directly to you. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. All right. So, early warning, dissemination of critical information to the vulnerables, it's close to our hearts. I'll talk about that first, then I'll address the issue of sectors, then lastly I'll wrap up with the innovation part of ICTs. ICT is always taken last, and we take it for granted. So, EWS is the most basic tool for saving lives, infrastructure, covering meteorology, water, energy, and transport, agriculture, our economy, as well as the mandate of SADC, Regional Integration Agenda. No one should miss out on any emergency alerts. The EW for All initiative has 4 pillars. Pillar 3, which deals with focusing on warning, dissemination, and communication. That's the basic EWS. It ensures that people receive warnings via multiple channels in advance of an imminent hazard that empowers people to prepare and respond timely in an appropriate manner. All alerting agencies, or you call them authorities, must be trained in Common Alerting Protocol, CAP in short. That's an international standard for EWS warnings. It's an ITU-T recommendation X1303. It is designed for all hazards, all media, and all communications. So CAP is used to communicate key facts: who, what, when, where, in different languages. ICT sector has been working with ITU, UNDRR, and lately with WMO, meteorology sector, on CAP training, because the Met sector is quite advanced in knowing how to package information, which we call emergency alerts, to the people. So there is a need to establish a database of alerting authorities. Meteorology already has it. Energy, transport, water, we don't. So normally in a country, you will have alerting authorities from Met, geology, hydrological, government, police, energy. Energy needs to be added, water, and transport. So they are the main source of CAP alerts. So for the early warning for all initiative to be successful by the year 2027, for everyone to receive emergency alert, it is instrumental that we integrate DRR in critical infrastructure sectors, because they are the main source. That's what I'm starting for. They are the main source for emergency alerts. So all member states also need to set up their multi-channel EWS to disseminate the alerts in all 4 stages of DRM cycle: mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. And this morning, I was in a meeting where we heard about forecasting. The earlier we forecast, we can share the data early and allow our people to be more prepared. We need to use various techniques, various technologies to deliver CAP alerts to everyone, including the vulnerables, people with disabilities, and the elderly. We're going to end up in that category. Now, it is an obligation of all licensed ICT operators to carry those alerts free of charge. It is in the law of all countries. It is also stipulated in the license. Now, when you look at SADC, as of last year, we had 91% mobile penetration. Everybody here has a mobile phone. The normal way of disseminating alerts to people is via radio, TV, terrestrial, satellite, and cable. Fixed line telephones, emergency radio, amateur radio, maritime radio. Now, maritime will be tricky for the islands. There's coast station, and then there's Coast Guard. Coast Guard is like the police at sea. So and there's also digital signage. Like on the road, you have all those message boards, which are all electronic. So in order for us to reach 100% of our people, we should leverage, for countries that have high mobile penetration, let us leverage on mobile EWS. There's a technology called cell broadcast. In Europe, you have it. It's also complemented with location-based. Cell broadcast allows us to receive message, to disseminate message to people in a specific area that has a disaster. Now, let me give you an example, a SADC example, of typical sectoral independencies. Meteorology forecasted Cyclone Freddy February 2023. Yeah? Floods came, knocked down all power lines in certain areas, damaged roads. ICT depends on power. Yes, we have power, we can maintain power because we have our own genset and batteries, but up to maybe 24 hours. So this is the independencies of the different sectors, especially for infrastructure. So when disaster strikes, often the local telecom networks get disrupted and communications may not be available during the emergency. On top of it, we are all calling our loved ones and families. We have network congestion to deal with. So through the assistance of the ITU, SADC has managed to develop a SADC model NETP, National Emergency Telecoms Plan. We are the first REC in Africa to have this model. And I'm pleased to say, even the model has been adopted. It has not even been taken to ministers. 4 member states have already domesticated it because of its importance. So basically, this document is a guiding regional strategic instrument to enable and ensure continued operations of telecom services during all 4 phases of DRM, but moreover, it promotes coordination across all levels of government, public-private organizations, and within communities at risk in SADC member states. We have also set up emergency telecommunications working group in some of the member states. This is to bring all the relevant actors to one table to start discussing how we can ensure telecoms is available during a disaster. Now, this is how the ICT sector is addressing the gap in emergency telecoms in DRR implementation. While we've been doing that, SHOCK DRR unit has been with us. So they know exactly. We've held 3 workshops since March 2023, and we just had our last one 2 weeks ago, and we're hoping to have this forum every year. It brings all relevant stakeholders that has to do with emergency telecoms. So DRM process requires the use of every available means of communications to maintain a continuous and timely flow of information between all stakeholders, including the general public. So one major challenge in SADC member states and in Africa is some responders are unable to communicate with others in view they have their own private mobile radio. It might be analog, it might be digital, but they're not the same. The solution for that, well, during emergency, what they do, they will always rely on telephones. And that's why I said you take the ICT for granted, or they use sat phones, right? There's a solution for that. It's called PPDR, Public Protection and Disaster Relief. So in 2021, we took to ministers the SADC framework for harmonization of the RF spectrum for PPDR networks to be developed. This system is digital. It allows various entities to communicate with each other. You can have VPN where the police, fire brigade, emergency, military, private sector can all ride on one network. You can make it in such a way that if you broadcast a message or a video or data for everybody to hear, they can all hear it. Okay. It can also be extended beyond the borders of a country, and therefore this is good because it enables regional coordination. And then whenever we have such a system, SHOCK should always be in the middle, especially if it has to do with coordination between 2 countries. Okay? Now, energy, water, you guys use walkie-talkies. But I bet you cannot talk to each other. You need to jump on PPDR. Okay? Now, lastly, I want to talk about innovations in ICT. So, Dumi, do you know that in Zambia, for the past 10 years, there have been a lot of floods in certain areas, and ITU has worked with ZICTA, and they have set up flood sensors with siren in this specific area, Mbeta Island and Kasaya village, which is next to Kazingula. So whenever there's a flood, the flood sensors picks up the message and relays it to a central monitoring station. Then a message comes up via CAP on the siren in the local language, advising everybody of the incident. That's floods. If you go to Australia, they have a fire sensor network. You can go on Google Maps, and then you can select the layer of fires. It shows you live where the fire areas are, the fire alerts. We can also do the same, work with Google to have Google alerts for the region. Last month, Google released a technology called FireSat. They have 5 satellites up there that can pick up a fire in an area of 5 meters by 5 meters, and within 20 minutes you can get that information. The fire sensors I was talking about, we can do the same for floods across the whole region and have it all networked, centrally monitored by SHOCK, because it has to do with region. In Mozambique, last October, they launched a balloon called Aerosat. It's at an altitude of 300 meters. Well, I would not recommend that we use it during cyclone, but it could be used when we have, let's say, a flood or a certain type of disaster where we need quick internet access in that specific area. So that's a helium balloon. We have high-altitude platform systems called HAPS that operates above the ceiling of aeroplanes between 20 and 50 kilometers. We have worked hard as SADC to make sure that the spectrum for HAPS has been approved by WRC in WRC 23. We have Earth stations in motion that covers emergency high-capacity broadband for aircrafts, maritime, rail, and vehicles. We released in 2019 the harmonized approach for domestic licensing and mutual license recognition of eSIMs. This is to encourage member states to use eSIMs because it's based on a satellite system, GSO, presently available today. Now we talk about NGSOs, another satellite system close to my heart. These are low-orbiting satellites, and you may have heard about Starlink, but they are meant.
Before I say final words, I would maybe like to pass for a lightning round across the panel. 20 seconds per person, maybe just after having heard what your colleagues shared as well about their challenges, their work, maybe just some final reflections on what you see are the next steps going forward.
We need to find each other and speak to each other every time. Thank you.
I think, yes, I'll also talk about collaboration, cooperation, and my colleague was talking about this WEFI nexus. So we can keep on adding, but there are certain sectors, like we being the providers of climate services, climate data, so we are cross-cutting when it comes to WEFI, or if we can add other sectors. I think Dr. George is saying, like, for example, communication also should be cross-cutting. Yes, so collaboration is a key. Thank you.
Collaboration, integrated approach. I think you mentioned the issue of the SACOF in the energy, all the weather forecast or the forecast that has been developed by our colleagues from meteorology. We have been conveying that information to the power utilities so that they can plan accordingly in terms of what to do in the next 6 months and what is expected rain and which regions are likely to get rain and those which won't get rain. So this is very important and looking forward. It was very important that in the last meeting we conveyed all the information to energy sector. Thank you.
Thank you. I was talking on the Nexus, integrated planning collaboration, not just only from the sectoral point of view, but what does it do in enhancing the lives of the people, livelihoods enhancement, industrialization of the region, indeed regional integration. I'm building on George's submission. Thank you.
All right. So a low-hanging fruit. Let's share information across. We already have many reports. If a portal could be developed where we could put all our reports together so we can know what each other is doing. This will enable risk-informed policy making. So we can start off with DRR-related reports, right? Like whoever that we have any workshop reports, let's share that. Lastly, in the Windhoek Declaration, we should celebrate DRR Emergency Telecoms Month, like we do for cybersecurity, to support the implementation of NETP. You know, each member state must have a national emergency telecoms plan. It is part of the DRR strategy of a country. Don't take ICT for granted.
Thinking and what's the plan in terms of, I think there are these regional borders that we do have in as far as this transformative governance processes that probably we're working on. I think, and secondly, I think listening to such interesting things that are being done, I'm just thinking, who's championing some of these things at country level?
How best can we then enhance accountability among member states and stakeholders to really ensure a transformative governance?
So in the NETP, it is very clear about the governance model where they recommend the regulator to take the lead. So in each country, in each member state, when they set up the NETP, the National Emergency Telecoms Plan, they have to form an emergency telecommunications working group. And among themselves, they will agree who's going to chair and take the lead. So what we have done in the past 2 weeks, we've established the SADC Emergency Telecommunications Register. It is in the SADC MNE model NETP. That list will now be shared with DRR and SHOC, so they know who are the key individuals, not only one. There's a focal point person plus an alternate. So just mobile phone, and you know today whenever you do an international meeting, they don't like sharing mobile phones and emails, but we've done that. We've prepared that register. I'm only waiting for Seychelles and Botswana. The moment we have that list, we will share. So by the tip with that register, the head of SHOC can call anyone. In each of these member states, we have 2 people, an alternate. In our workshops, we work very closely with UNDRR, ITU, and WMO. We build capacity, but there's also bilateral arrangements between member states. Some member states, for example, Mauritius is well advanced in terms of location-based SMS and cell broadcasts. So we have that arrangement within SADC, and we're hoping to have more frequent forums for the capacity building and sharing and transferring expertise. But SADC Secretariat always is available. Our commitment is to help member states on any issues regarding NETP. Thank you.
I want to attend the session of the private sector and how the business can support the DRR issues. My recommendation is that let's have the dedicated funds that are specific for particular functions. We know at national level we have the energy fund, we have the water fund, even at regional level, we have these funds that existed. So from this can be levied from all different sectors so that they can contribute toward the disaster. We have the road fund, the road accident fund. Let's have the DRR dedicated fund. I think that would be my recommendation.
Can I just say something about accountability and governance? Yeah, I think one word also that is key is partnerships. We have got regional partners. IFRC in particular is an MOU with SADC. So we want you to come in and also influence. You know, SADC is known about developing protocols. So that in those protocols that we develop, we also leverage on partners' capacity so that we are able to integrate that within those protocols. Thank you.
Thanks. They've dealt with most of the parts, but it's the issue of, I think you talked to the championing. The issue of accountability or accounting, our SADC system is just allows that by design. And that at the regional level, we can start an action to the member states, but there are standing committees, focal points that we work with. And then if it's learning from the member states, it comes through that process. Ultimately, the decision-making is taken through, filtered through our ministers, even up to the heads of states. But once it's launched, the accountability from our end, it's not that much difficult. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm Sephelele Mkhonda from Eswatini, Red Cross. But my take probably is to say, based on the model that SADC is using with the member states, how do we support or ensure they probably cascade the same models downwards in their countries? For example, you have specific partnerships that you have at SADC level and who are leading certain sectors based on that. But when you go to the country level, those sectors are no longer led by the very same counterparts, probably, if I may say. So how do we ensure that continues? Because based on the MOUs that you are having with those partners, then in country it could be easier to cascade that from the regional down to the countries. Then also probably to say how best we support. I know there are standing trainings that SADC will have with the member states, but how do we ensure that it's a holistic approach in terms of our trainings? Because if we talk of member states, we may be talking of the governments and probably the specific government-related entities. But the players, it's not just the two when it comes to DRM and the transformative governance we want. It's everyone who is into the space that we want to affect, especially when we talk of DRR. It is not just the two or probably the few who may be capacitated. Thank you.
Our approach is that we work through resolutions, council, ministers. Like I think end of this month we have a DRM ministers meeting in Victoria Falls, and we have invited also partners to that meeting. And it is at this forum that we have to plan about capacity building programs to make sure that it's integrated and it's all inclusive. You know, for example, if I talk about Civil Protection Committee in Zimbabwe, where I come from, this also includes non-government actors in there, and we target such kind of forums. So I think maybe it's good also to extend this invitation. I'm sure partners have received this invitation to this meeting in Victoria Falls, 24 to 28, you know, where DRM ministers will be. And this point will be very good to raise. Thank you.
There's nothing left to say apart from thank you very much for your attention and your questions. And thank you especially to the distinguished panelists for sharing your experiences. It has been a great pleasure. Also for me, very valuable learning from your insights.